Whoa, wait a minute. I'm not here to quit drinking. I'm perfectly happy with my alcohol consumption. I've been drinking 38 years and I have no intention to quit. Finally, they cut me loose at 17, gave me a diploma and said, don't come back. There's nothing like sparring. There's nothing that brings you so in the moment. I've not found another thing that I can do that makes me so focused, and you're just right there. You have to be. There is not a choice. Yeah, I've got lots of great memories of that. If you can scrub away all the anxiety and everything else that we have that's just kind of layered up on top of us, once you clean that slate, you're left with happiness, and that's what we're trying to show. Wherever you are in life and whatever you've been through, it has nothing to do with where you're going. The past has no bearing on your future, and you're free to change the direction you're headed at any time you want.
Hello, listeners, and welcome back to Social Skills Coaching. I'm your host, Russell, and our guest today is Rick Culleton. Rick is an entrepreneur, an author, and a mindfulness advocate. And Rick, with just those three descriptors, introduce us to yourself and tell us how each of those fit into your approach to what we're going to talk about today.
Well, I am kind of all over the place. I started life as an entrepreneur. I'm working on my second book right now. I've got businesses in the U.S. and Costa Rica, and I like to travel and find myself all over the world.
You have a book already out. Tell us about that.
Well, my first book is Messed Up Like You, and it's about growing up and thriving with ADHD, entering the world of entrepreneurship, and all of the pluses as well as the minuses of going through life with ADHD and considering the way people look at it. And a lot of it focuses on childhood and what they try to do with you, and then moves on to young adulthood, and then being an entrepreneur with ADHD and all the benefits that go along with it. And it's a story that's framed around me getting my pilot's license, which was a pretty unusual thing to happen in the first place. It's got some great stories in it, and it's inspirational probably to anybody who's trying to get by with ADHD.
So tell us what ADHD is, and let's start with as a child, because I don't think we have a real understanding of some of the struggles that diagnosis brings to children and their development.
Well, as a child, I think most of the problems I had was the way that I was looked at by others, by adults. I don't think I would have even realized that there was an issue if someone hadn't told me. But when I was younger, they called it ADD in the 70s, and I was attention deficit disorder with an emphasis on hyperactive. And I believe that for the most part, I am now technically diagnosed as ADHD, attention deficit hyperactive disorder. And that is primarily what the diagnosis is across the board. There's some different, there's some varying degrees, but that's pretty much all encompassing today. And when I was a child, they were all over the place. Should we medicate them? Should we not medicate them? Put them in a special room. At one point in the third grade, they moved me into an accelerated class and put me with third and fourth graders with the idea that I would skip the fourth grade and go right into the fifth grade, which didn't happen. And I went from that class to the fourth grade the next year, where they thought they should hold me back and keep me there an extra year. And then finally, they cut me loose at 17, gave me a diploma and said, don't come back. And so it was a bit of a roller coaster ride. And, again, I had a problem learning. I knew that I was all over the place, but as a kid, you didn't know that everybody else wasn't too. So it didn't really seem to me to be unusual. I had a hard time focusing. I'd easily become bored in class. And the way this usually went was you'd walk into the classroom, the teacher would start to talk first day, first week, and you would feel that you're above and beyond whatever it is they're teaching, and this is just not entertaining at all. And you zone out. And then you tune back in either at the end of that class or a couple weeks from there, and you realize that you're completely lost and you have no idea what algebra is all about after all, and you're struggling from there on out. And that happened a lot.
It's interesting that you knew you were diagnosed, but I speak with people, and you hear frequently, we grew up poor, but we didn't know we were poor. So you grew up ADHD and you knew, but it wasn't really an impact on your life. I'm a late baby boomer, an early Gen Xer, you're by appearances. So at that time, it was very different than it is now, with diagnosis and medical treatment and schooling in particular. Is
Yeah,
that accurate?
it was much different. And, they were still learning how to deal with people like myself. And, I might have been a little bit on the extreme end because I was one, now I think there's a far greater percentage of people diagnosed earlier on. And at that point, I was in a school that our grade had about 100 people in it, maybe the only one at that time. I don't remember anybody else being diagnosed. So it was a much smaller pool of diagnosis and no real tools to deal with it. It was like you just kind of shuffle them around, give them to somebody else. The teachers in the beginning didn't put, I don't even know that when I was in that third, fourth grade situation that there was a label put on me yet. It was just a problem kid. This guy's trouble. He's trouble in the hallways. He doesn't learn in school. He's not living up to his potential. Those were the early diagnoses as troublemaker and unattentive. I think the formal diagnosis came later on and suspicions arose. I was never offered medication or anything like that as a child. I was probably nearly 40 years old before anyone ever suggested I start taking any type of medication. And that was a very short lived trial.
Again, for our listeners that don't know and are interested, a diagnosis like this, at least now with the DHM-5, I think is the current one, that diagnosis is a very specific list of symptoms or activities that a person does. And it's very clinical, of course, by definition. At that time, was that how the diagnosis was made, or was it just he's out of control, let's call him ADD?
Most of what I remember
Or were you aware that,
Most
yeah,
of what I remember experiencing
yeah.
didn't have any
Oh,
type of label on at all. They were just trying to contain me, keep me from causing any problems or disrupting the rest of the school. That was their primary objective. They weren't really interested in diagnosing what could potentially be wrong.
I taught for 10 or 15 years, started teaching in 1984, 85 school year, so that dates me. And I remember the first parent I had that came to me and said their child had a learning disability. And I was not schooled in any of that. Of course, my degree in secondary education, like many college degrees, doesn't prepare you for the occupation at all. I had no training in what to do with anybody that had a learning disability, even what they were. So it took me completely by surprise, my lack of experience. So maybe that's why I'm hitting it a little more deeply than we need to, or that you'd like to at this point. So I appreciate your candor with that and sharing that information. You are an entrepreneur. You have several businesses in several countries, it sounds like.
I do.
Are they related? Are they a wide variety of things? It sounds like you dabble into a lot of different
They're
areas.
not very similar at all. And I deliberately look for things that are, I suppose, different challenges to keep me entertained, prevent the boredom. But my the oldest company I have is about 28 years old now, and it's based in Texas. We sell refurbished computer equipment, a place called discountelectronics.com. We still have retail stores as well as website, sell online, and I'm still involved with that company every day. I'm still the CEO and president, although I take more of a marketing role. That's the part that I enjoy the most. I'm web developer some days, fireman others. And over the last 20 years or so, I've been investing in real estate and opened a company in Austin that does primarily purchases real estate, fixes it up, rents it out, commercial, residential, multifamily, single family. We've expanded that into Colorado and a little bit into Costa Rica, where I got into the hotel business. Started with vacation rentals down there that I moved an operation from the States into Costa Rica, and then later changed the building type from homes and apartments and such into hotels.
Are these businesses that I mean, you're involved daily in them, it sounds like. Are these things you develop to try and get to a point where they would just go on their own and you're looking for something new? You find some reliable people to run that business? Or are you working 27 hours a day to keep track of all these
I do.
things?
I enjoy working, so it's a labor of love. I have great people, and I couldn't do this without them. That's a big part of being successful is to have the right team. We've got some of the most fantastic people, both in the United States and in Costa Rica. The folks I work with at Discount Electronics, many of them have been there decades. We're a family. It's a small company, 30 employees. We've all worked together for a long time, and I think we all enjoy our jobs very much. I've still got one employee who's about to hit the 10-year mark down there. The hotel manager has been there since the day we opened up. One of the hotels is on the beach. It's a beautiful spot to be. I'm not such an awful boss. They've got a pretty good job, and they enjoy life down there. And then the real estate company is more of an on-demand type thing where we have tenants We manage a lot of that with software, and then when we need people, we sub out. We have regulars that we sub to all the time. One who used to be an employee who now is a subcontractor that just does his own thing and works for me and a variety of other people. But that's pretty much my work. My email is very interesting. WhatsApp, you never know what's coming in. You open that phone up and you don't know what language it's going to be in, and you have absolutely no idea what it's going to be about. But I guarantee every morning it's interesting.
I imagine so. Two things come from those last few sentences. Obviously, you're not a terrible boss if you've had people with that kind of tenure within your organizations. So two questions that I'm pretty sure they dovetail into one another. Building a team, finding the right members for a team has to be crucial in any organization like that. We hear frequently, surround yourself with the best people and then let them do their job. Hire the right person for the right job and let them do the job. How do you go about building that team? What do you look for? Expand on that. And then when you have a team together, obviously you're doing some things very right that keeps that team together. Can you talk to both points?
Well, when it comes to hiring, I really look for self-motivated people. I am not an over-the-shoulder kind of boss. I don't know where anybody is. I don't know what time they come to work, when they go home, or where they're working from. And for that, it just requires somebody that's got self-discipline, that knows how to get the job done. I don't care if you work 4 hours or 12 hours. I prefer you don't have to work 12 hours. And it's just a matter of getting the job done, you figuring out how to do it and getting results. The hotel's a little bit different in that, we have places there where people need to be. Somebody's got to be sitting at reception, so there's a schedule and they need to be there to check people in. And, it's a little bit different hiring there because you need somebody bilingual and there's a lot of other requirements. But at Discount Electronics, and most of the folks that have been there a long time have had varied positions. They'll come in the door as one thing. One of my favorite stories is a guy that we hired out of the Home Depot to lay bricks at the construction of a new store back in 2010 or 2011. And when we finished up, I gave everybody a little bit extra money, thanked them for the work, and said goodbye. And the next day I came in when the store opened, and he was there. And I said, well, Fernando, what are you doing here? We're done. And he goes, no, I'm going to work. And I'm like, well, I don't have any work for you. And he goes, I'll do whatever you need. I'm like, well, I don't need anything. He goes, you got this store. Somebody's got to work here, right? And he barely spoke English at the time. I'm like, I'll find something for you for now, but you need to find a job. It's now 2025. That was 2010. He is our number one computer technician.
Wow.
He's never left. I got married, had some kids, and has turned out to be quite the employee.
Fantastic. That's incredible. From bricklayer to the computer technician, all within the same company. That's a great story.
You never know what anybody's capable of until you give them a chance.
That is exactly the truth. And it's seeing that, obviously he had some tenacity to come back after the bricklaying was done and to put himself in the open store and ask for something. But you were able to see that in a person, and I find that you kind of wanted to give him the credit for it, but for someone to see that, to give them the chance, to encourage them, there had to been some times where you went an extra step to make sure he was educated or had the tools he needed or learned the things he needed to do. So developing an employee like that, is that a part of your process? Is that something you consciously do or look to do?
I'd love to take credit for that, but Fernando found his own way, and most of my employees do. I'll give them the way to make it on their own, but I'm not there for hand-holding, and I'm not that type of leader. I give them the space. I tell them what's expected of them, and oftentimes what it is that I tell them I'm expecting from them in the beginning is not what the job entails in just a few months or a year. Most of the people that work for me have had multiple jobs, except for possibly my CFO. Just about everybody at that company has moved around. Oftentimes, we'll find someone in a retail store that looks to have promise. They'll be selling computers in one of the stores, and I'll have some interaction with them and say, this is somebody I think we want to bring in, move them over to the main building, and what they're going to do from there is anybody's guess. And they kind of find their own way. You like coding? You want to be a salesperson? What's your fancy?
I don't want to seem like I'm just flattering you, but the mindset there is the top 95 percentile of bosses I've had and seen. Your employees obviously respond to that. They stay with you. They stick with an organization because you make expectations clear. You give them the room to do it, but you're also looking for ways to enhance your organization by enhancing your employees. That's unusual. It's well above the curve in my experience. Your bio talked about a journey through ADHD, which we've talked about. And then it mentions a phrase I've not seen before, accidental sobriety. What does that refer to?
That's an interesting story. I was on a path. I was having a lot of anxiety, which I think is pretty typical for entrepreneurs. And sometimes we don't even realize how much we're living with. And mine had gotten to the point where I'd wake up in the morning trembling, like literally shaking in bed and have to get out of bed quickly because it was just going to get worse. When I'd stop and think about what was causing the problem, I really couldn't get to it. There were acute things every single day. It was something different, or sometimes it would be the same things. It could be money, it could be this, it could be that. And you'd see a recurring theme that once this problem left my mind, another one filled it. And I knew that these weren't really problems of the severity that I was giving them credit for. And I received an email one day from a woman by the name of Julie Hutchinson. It read, "Would you like to wake up happy?" And then the email proceeded to sound like she'd been peering through the windows and watching me because it was just very spot on. And I showed it to my wife and I said, "This is just kind of crazy." And so I responded to the email. It turns out that Julie was a family member of some people that I knew very well. Two of her family members had worked for me. One of them, her niece and I had worked together very closely and had traveled together. And so that there was a little bit of trust there. And I started a course that she took called Core Performance. And I was tricked a little bit, maybe out of my own naivety in a few ways. But the first one was that we started breathing exercises, which is a meditation practice that I still use every day. I do the same meditation that we learned back then, did it today, and I'll do it tomorrow. And during this process, as we were getting in here through this, she told me about a month in, she said, "Rick, you're going to find when this anxiety leaves and you get all of this under control, you're probably not even going to need the alcohol anymore." And I said, "Whoa, wait a minute. I'm not here to quit drinking. I'm perfectly happy with my alcohol consumption. I've been drinking 38 years and I have no intention to quit." And a couple months went by and I was in Manhattan in my apartment one day and had gone to see an old friend. I bought a bunch of beer that morning, and I loved IPA. Still do. I just drink it with the non-alcoholic version now. And I bought some pretty expensive beer down the street from my apartment, brought it back, put it in the fridge, walked around town most of the day, and came back at about 5 o'clock, and threw it and all the rest of the alcohol down the trash chute from the 45th floor. It hit the bottom, and I never had a drink again. I'm still not 100%
Wow.
sure what caused that to be the day. I mean, it was something I contemplated before. I always thought, one day when the doctor tells me that my liver is going to jump out of my body or something, that I would quit. I drank every single day of my life for 38 years, except for 2 days when I took my son on a Boy Scout camp out. So it was a pretty major change.
And give us this person you mentioned, Julie, is in the business of, she offers seminars and that type of
She's got an ongoing business called Core Performance and runs an evergreen program where there's always folks coming in and out, and you've got people in all stages of this. Runs about 6 months. There's a lot more to it than just the breathing exercises and meditation, but that seemed to be the part that I needed and really clung to. There's a gadget that hooks to your ear and you measure your results on your phone. And I'm a data guy, so I just love making the bars move in the right direction. And it was pretty amazing to me that when I did it right, and the things appeared on the screen the way they were supposed to, in the amount of time they were supposed to, how good I felt. And cumulatively, if I did this day after day, it got better and better and better until, you have that same. I think a lot of us do this with almost everything. Like, you don't need the cure anymore because you're fixed. And I got to that point where I would skip once in a while. I'm like, very quickly realized that I needed that this was going to have to be a forever thing if I was going to be forever healthy.
About what year was that Julie got in touch with you?
2023 at the end of the year.
Oh, okay. Oh,
Yes, it's
recently.
been maybe 15 months.
Okay. It struck me with the mindfulness and the meditation. Obviously, in our podcast and in our books, there's a lot of emphasis on mindfulness and achieving that through meditation or through mindfulness practices and so forth. And you mentioned an app and feedback, and that brought to my mind the whole biofeedback fad that went through. I don't know if you ever had any dealings with that, but I remember Popular Mechanics or Popular Science had plans to build yourself a biofeedback machine so that you could monitor your breathing and your body temperature and learn to control them. And honestly, I haven't seen a meditation or mindfulness process that had the physical feedback that that has. Is that something of Julie's, or is that just another product that she
It's something that they
recommends?
use. It's the app called Inner Balance that we use. The little gadget that hooks to my ear is made by a company called HeartMath. They have their own app. I think you can use either one of them, and it works on a point system. You work up through levels. I started at level 1, and you try to get to 400 points, and then you'll move up to level 2, and level 4 is as high as it goes. These days, I get 600 points in as little time as I can. I stay there until I get 600 points. If it's a bad day, that might be 20 minutes. If it's a good day, it might be 8. And as long I have found that if I stay the duration and get that much work done, that brings me where I need to be.
A completely different slant than anything I've heard on mindfulness. Almost a mindfulness competition. I like that. I like keeping score and tracking the numbers and those kind of things. So it takes your daily steps, 10,000 steps a day to a whole new level, kind of in the
Yeah,
opposite
I am a
direction.
data. I'm a data.
Heart Math was the name, and what
Oh,
was
go
the app?
ahead.
No, no,
Yes,
Heart
HeartMath.
Math was the inner
HeartMath makes
piece
the piece that goes through here, and
and
then
inner
the app that
piece,
I use is called Inner Balance.
inner balance, and a Heart Math produced piece of hardware. Fantastic. Thanks for that. Um, Sorry, just looking over my notes here. I want to phrase the next question correctly. Um, so your bio, again, your information, a journey through ADHD. We talked about at length. Accidental sobriety. Thanks for that story. And your own personal development. You now help others find true and lasting happiness. Does that relate to another entrepreneurial adventure you have going? Is that personal relationships? Are you a coach or a
The
counselor?
primary means of doing that right now is through the second book. Well, you can find out more about that one at mymorningstack.com. And then when I did it in the day seemed to really matter. And I learned within a couple months that the earlier in the day I did it, the better off I was. That became one of the first things I did. And then I took that piece that came from having done the meditation and thought, I'm going to make use of this for a little while. And I developed a morning stack that I follow. And the second piece of that is something I call techno fasting, which is where you just stay away from technology for as long as possible in the morning. You don't wake up with a cell phone. But this is where we're going with this, is to try to help people build their own morning stack and find that comfort zone, that peace that can be there. I believe that we're all happy and peaceful if you can scrub away all the anxiety and everything else that we have that's just kind of layered up on top of us. Once you clean that slate, you're left with happiness. And that's what we're trying to show, is that, you can get to this with just a little bit of work. But it's a continuing effort. It's not the gym. You can't go to the gym for a month every other day and get done at the end of 30 days and go, look, I'm strong and fit and I'm going to be great for the rest of my life. And mindfulness is the same way. It's a lifelong practice. If you want to be mentally healthy, it's the same as being physically healthy. It's something you need to work at all the time. You can't eat good one day and then live on cotton candy and expect to maintain your health. So this is where we're going with this. It's a starter plan that'll get you going with your stack, and then instructions as to how you can develop your own.
Wow. I want to make sure we have the books distinguished and labeled for our listeners. Your first book. So let's take a step back. I didn't jot down the title for it. I'm not sure that we made it clear what it is, what it's about, where it's available, those types of
My
things.
first book was Messed Up Like You, and it's available on Amazon, Barnes, anywhere.
Yes.
It's primarily aimed at people with ADHD, parents of people with ADHD, maybe someone who has a friend or relative. And it's interesting and funny at the same time. And I wrote that book aimed at maybe a younger version of myself, or maybe if I could go back in time and could have given it to my mother. It's not for everybody, but if it does fit, I think you'll find it very useful. And the second book doesn't have a title yet. It will be out this year, but it's more of a guide. It's going to be a very short, concise, pocket-sized book that is meant to be there as a companion to help you get through the day, create this foundation, this morning stack as you can, and adapt it as you need to, depending on seasons, where you live, what you're doing. Mine is very involved. My stack today is daunting, and I enjoy it very much, but it involves a lot, everything from running to going to the gym to cold plunge. And so it's something that is obviously evolved over a long period of time for myself, and I'm trying to give everyone else kind of a starter. You don't need to, you can do 20% of what I do and get 80% of the results, and that's where we're going to start.
We talk a lot. on the podcast about an evening ritual, a sleep ritual to get wound down from the day and get your mindset there. And we talk about morning routine, but this is morning routine on steroids. I mean, take us through if you don't mind, what does your average day look like? What are some of these things that you're doing that you're willing to
So
share?
I have a special stack that I brought with me because I'm traveling. I'm in Europe right now. So I don't have a cold plunge I can carry around with me. I'm working on that, but at the moment I'm without. So it starts out pretty easily. I get up very early. So I'm up at about normally 5:30 in the morning. And one of the very first things I do, I drink a glass that's pretty much salt water. It's got magnesium in it and so forth to rehydrate. And then I head outside. Not looking at light through the windows, but actually get outdoors and help reinforce my circadian rhythm and make sure that I'm keeping my sleep cycle in sync. And then I come back inside and meditate for whatever amount of time it takes me to get my 600 points. And then I do 25 push-ups and I stretch. I've been nursing an Achilles tendon injury and have just started running again, so I'm being kind of cautious with that. I journal after I get done stretching. I have a quirky thing that I picked up about a year ago or a little less with my journal. And for the first paragraph, I write with my left hand. It's a neuroplasticity trick that, on top of keeping all the neurons firing in my brain enough, I've learned to write pretty well with my left hand, even in cursive. I'm impressed. I've even impressed myself. And so, this is probably where I would leave most of the people is like, this is where, if those things work for you, that's a great foundation for your day. You're talking about 40 minutes or less. So I think that's that type of stack. It doesn't need to be those things. And then where I go from there is there's physical exercise every day. It's either going to be running or the gym. And I'll go back and forth, and then I take at least one day and sometimes 2 days a week to recover. And I'm a gadget junkie. So I've got an Oura ring on one hand and a Garmin watch on the other hand. And, I'm always looking at the data and I listen to it too. So when it says, hey, you need to back off, time to take it easy, I do. I learned just recently how important the recovery part was. I was always go, 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 ignore, they're not talking to me when they say slow down. So I was pushing it and I started to see some data signs that looked really bad. My resting heart rate was going up, my heart rate variability was going down. And so since I've started to listen to these gadgets a little bit more closely, I'm doing better. So, every other day I'll run, every other day I'll go to the gym. And then once I finish that routine, it's then my workday really starts, so when I get that stuff out of the way, that's when I go and get on the computer. And one thing I left out in that whole routine is the techno fasting and that, I stay away from the phone. So my phone stays and do not disturb all the time, every day, all day, but I do need to use it in the morning for the meditation. I have a tone that plays, so my breathing is asynchronous. It's the same amount of time in and out, which has been a very important part for me. So I do need that gadget for that part, but I don't use it for anything else. When I'm done with the meditation, I put it down, and then it's usually at least 2 hours before I pick something up electronic or turn on anything where you've got any screen or any even audible. I don't even let the news play in the background or anything.
So you're familiar with the Garmin. Your recovery today was delayed by an excessive amount of stress. You probably used to see that often, but maybe not so much anymore since you've gotten things adjusted a little
Yeah,
bit.
I'm learning. I play with a lot of that stuff. I'm working now on closing that window of time that I eat, and I have found the data that comes out of that to be really interesting too. My resting heart rate is dropping earlier in the night. I still don't get the amount of deep sleep. I get enough that I feel very rested. I'm just not impressed with the numbers. I rarely get an hour of deep sleep, and that's a little troubling. I can ask my 8 sleep, I can ask my Oura ring or my Garmin. They're all going to tell me I didn't have enough deep sleep, but maybe I'm wired just a little bit differently, but I still play with a lot of that stuff and, stop eating earlier and earlier in the day and get that resting heart rate to drop earlier in the night. Sleep's an incredibly important part of the day. We can't even talk about a morning stack if you haven't had a good night's sleep. There's no point at all. Sometimes I'm just in it. I go out and see the sun when it's setting as well as when it's rising. So you get some of that light at sunset. It doesn't mean right at sunset, but it's really important to send that signal to your brain that this is the end of the day, especially for someone who moves around. And it's not just about going from the States to Europe, but when I moved from Colorado to New York, that 2 hours difference, it's really important that I get reset, stay reset. And then, if I need to at night, I use this little electronic gadget that makes you drowsy. It's got damp sponges you put on your temples. It's called TDCS, transcranial something. Anyway, that along with binaural beats, and I can knock myself out in seconds. Literally, it's probably 5 minutes with that stuff, and I'm out.
Okay. Yeah, binaural beats have come up a few times in the podcast. I find those interesting. as you were running through your morning stack, I thought, wow, it's got to be 10, 10:30, 11 o'clock in the morning before you're done with these things. But you've accomplished that in 40 minutes because you're going outside. It sounds like this is not a 30-minute walk. It might be, is that, things you're doing, 25 push-ups can take me half an hour maybe to do, but your 25 push-ups probably take you 2 or 3 minutes. Your outside time is probably, I'm guessing, maybe 5 or 10 minutes. So when listeners say, I don't have time to do all those things in the morning, any of us can find, some amount of time. Nobody has a schedule that's full on a regular basis. So to do all that in 40 minutes is great. It's kind of mind-boggling that you've perfected things
I
to that
still have
point.
to stay after myself. I mean, I'm no superhero. I get distracted, I pet the cat. You can find a million excuses not to get into a cold plunge. I can tell you that firsthand. When I'm in Texas or almost everywhere, except on the road, cold plunge is part of that too. But you can stack these in such a way that on a day that I run, I don't go outside to get the sunlight. As soon as I'm done meditating, I got the running shoes on and I'm out the door. So I've killed two birds with one stone. I don't wear my sunglasses. I'm getting the sunlight that I need to set my circadian rhythm. At the same time, I'm getting the cardio exercise that I need. Now, if it's a day that I go to the gym, I'm going to go outside and walk around. And if it's bright out, 5, 7 minutes is enough for me. And then I'm back inside to continue on with that. So I don't want to put off getting to work until too late in the day. And for example, if I'm traveling and I sleep until 8 o'clock, I know that by 10 o'clock, I need to be working because my brain is only going to be at its best until noon, maybe 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And then you're diminishing returns for me anyway, from that point forward. So I might break that up. And on a gym day, I might go to the gym later in the afternoon. That might be something that gets done later in the day because the reality is we all have to work, right?
That is true. You're like the Rocky of self-help. Everything you say are things that are repeatedly given in our books. The habit stacking, getting a new habit attached to an old habit so one flows into another. Those set routines, a morning routine, an evening routine, the cold plunge, even the physicality of it, the mindfulness. You're putting into practice, I'm going to say 80% of some of the most common self-improvement advice that's out there. And I find that quite admirable that you have the motivation and the determination, even on a difficult day, to get yourself into the process because you know the payout. You know the benefit of doing that, and you know the downside of not doing it
I
possibly.
learned a good lesson on this trip. I cold plunge all the time, and this is the longest trip I've taken in quite a while. It was an accidental, kind of a funny mistake, but I went to fill the cold plunge one day, set the timer, said, Google, tell me when whatever time is up. And I go upstairs and I hear the timer go off and I run down and the tub had overflown. Luckily, the floor, it was a place where it could get wet. It didn't matter. I'm like, ugh. So I turned the hose off, let the chiller run. I just got back in town and I got in the cold plunge the next day. The water spills over the top. It's up to my chin, little 43 degrees, 10 minutes. I don't, a couple days later, and I'm like, my pinky in my right hand doesn't tingle anymore at all. And my shoulders feel so much better. I got here, I'm now 10 days without a cold plunge. My shoulders are killing me. I mean, I'm 58 years old. I've fought Taekwondo for a decade. I have put my body through some stuff. And that cold plunge makes me pain free. I forget about the endorphin release or the weight loss
Really,
or the mental. I am pain free, and it's without it. It came back quick. I think it was day 7 without a cold plunge. Like here it comes, and the same pain that I've probably been living with for decades in my shoulders and neck didn't bother me that much then because I was accustomed to it. When it came after I've had relief for a while and it comes back, it's just a reinforcer. And the lesson behind all that is that, once you learn the benefits to these things, to eating healthy, to going to the gym, to getting enough sleep, it's not hard to stay focused on them because it just, do you want a great life? You want to be happy and healthy, or do you not? That's your choice.
so if you did Taekwondo for a decade, you're what, second,
No,
third
I have
degree? Did
I went to a very tough school, a very tough school. I'm a slow learner. It took me 8 of those 10 years to get my first degree black belt. And then I enrolled in the second degree program and couldn't cut it. I stayed in the school and I taught a lot. I taught a lot of children. I really enjoyed that part of it. But if you read my first book, it's about me getting my pilot's license. So to get a pilot's license is 40 hours of instruction. It takes more to become a yoga teacher than a pilot. Anyway, to become a pilot takes 40 hours of instruction. I failed my test after 2 years and 100 hours of instruction and had to go back to school. I am not the world's fastest learner, so a decade to get my 8 of those 10 years just to get my first degree. But I enjoyed every minute of it. I love that school. It was Third Coast Martial Arts in Austin. You know, all of those programs probably work pretty similarly in that you teach when you get to a certain level. My wife and I taught Little Dragons together, and I taught some older kids too. But that was a very enjoyable experience and a very enjoyable part of my life.
You learn a lot from that. My kids all were involved in it, and then that dragged us into it. I did it for 2 or 3 years. Our dojo, our school was much more family oriented, so the testing process was a tenth of what yours sounds like it was in the school you were at. And I'm kind of jealous because I wished we had been pushed, maybe not to the level that you were pushed, but a little bit more. But I enjoyed that. A lot of the benefits that you see in some of the things you're talking about with the mindfulness and the breathing and that kind of stuff can be learned in association with a martial art if your instructor leans that way. So a decade. Now, you're having, on the physical side of it, you say you still have continual pain from whatever activities, but these are things that are, your workouts are not inducing. Are you working out at that level? You're not sparring or competing anymore, doesn't sound like, but are you working out at a level that keeps the pains going, and that's where the cold plunge
I
comes
don't think
in?
that the workouts are causing the pain. I fought a lot. I was in the ring every weekend. I'd go to every tournament I could. I went
Yeah.
to sparring night every night. And at the time, I thought, I'm loaded up with headgear. And when I recently had a problem and they got in there about 2 years ago and took a look. And he's like, have you had a really traumatic injury to the right side of your neck? No, nothing at all. And he showed me the picture. I was like, I don't even really understand what I'm looking at. And he goes, well, this calcification on the right side, this is really bad. He goes, I don't know what happened here. I'm like, I did fight for a few years, but I had headgear on. He goes, yeah, that doesn't help your neck. So, I'm always getting hit with the right foot, and the neck took a lot of the trauma, but it's very manageable. The cold plunge does it, and I don't have any debilitating, I've got mild pain, and I'm not even sure that that's where it all came from. I've had motorcycle accidents, and you name it, my body's been put through the ringer a few times.
The fifth or sixth decade, things have an accumulative effect as you go through, and they build up over time. Yeah, the whole the sparring thing is addictive,
Oh
is
boy.
it not?
If there's anything I've given up in my life, I was a cyclist for a long time, and there are days that I miss that, but there's nothing like sparring. There's nothing that brings you so in the moment. I've not found another thing that I can do that makes me so focused, and you're just right there. You have to be. There is not a choice. You know, I, yeah, I've got lots of great memories of that.
I found myself one time in the preparing for a sparring class, and I thought, as I'm getting ready, I thought, when I started this, I came in with a gi, and that was it. I put on the uniform and went to class, and now here I am. I am armored up with soft padding everywhere. I'm taping up toes. I've got everything from foot guard to shin guard, all the way up to the headgear, and my hands are wrapped. It's like, where did this evolve from a simple thing into this competition that I've made it? But yeah, it was fantastic. It was a lot of fun, and when you get the right instructor, amazing what they can do and what you can learn. I'll indulge myself with a short story on one of my instructors, who was a third or fourth degree at the time, and this was in a large taekwondo organization, so the testing was nowhere near. It was a family oriented, but he could do things sparring that just were superhuman to me, and I learned so much from him. The amount of ground he could cover, the control he had, and I found he could easily break a bone at any time he wanted with a kick or a punch, and he would hit you hard enough that you felt it, that you knew you got hit, but he would control it enough, unless he needed to, that he wasn't going to hurt you. So the right instructor in the right environment can really change your life.
Yes, that is true.
Yeah, time has flown by. We're coming up on about 10 minutes left. I just wanted to scan the notes here because I want to make sure I didn't leave out anything. I think we've covered most of the things. One thing I did want to say, mindfulness and meditation you talked about in a way that was similar to your morning routine. These are not things you start on the first day and go into a 45-minute process. Your mindfulness built up from, I'm assuming if you're like, you're not like most people, I don't think, but if you went, maybe you had a quicker build up into it than I've had when I've worked on it. But it's, the first time, if you get through 2 or 3 minutes, that's a bit of a victory. Or when you're building your morning stack, if you get one or two habits and then you build, do you find it to be cumulative, something that you work on over a period of time and it becomes a big part? Or did you jump into a large part of it and just maybe expand a
No,
little
it,
bit from
it
there?
definitely is something that I had to work on. And like I say, I'm no different than anybody else. The meditation was on my list to do. And in the beginning, it didn't get done in the morning. And it was oftentimes anxiety causing because it was on my list of things to do. And here it is 5 o'clock and it hasn't been done yet, especially when I was still drinking and 6 o'clock is right around the corner. So, that was a big, I would do it, but it would be late in the day. And it didn't have quite the same effect. I would find that I wasn't getting the score that I needed. I wasn't getting the relief from the anxiety that I had gotten at other times. And then if we had a scheduled class or a meeting and I was doing it earlier in the day, I felt better. I didn't jump into it at all. I had no morning routine whatsoever other than wiping off my hangover and heading for the espresso machine.
And what was the first thing that you started that started building your stack?
The very first thing that I did for my stack was push ups. And I don't even remember where that started. Probably inspired by somebody watching some YouTube video. Almost immediately, within a couple days of starting with the push ups, I went into stretching just because I was having so many flexibility issues all the way around. Later on, when I was having problems with my Achilles, they reinforced that thought with, I don't really have an Achilles tendon injury. It's the upper chain is just so tight. I was somebody who just went to the gym and just lifted all the time and didn't pay much attention to anything else other than that. So that was the next thing. It was push-ups and stretching, and then I don't even remember what got put in there next. The abbreviated version of techno fasting came on pretty quickly. I knew the phone and the computer were big triggers for me. I would use them all day long to aggravate myself, looking at things that I shouldn't be looking at, whether they were sales numbers or stock quotes. It's crazy how self-destructive you can become with something like that. Your body's doing something that you know is going to do all the wrong things, just screw up your endocrine system and send all these signals that you don't want, yet you do it anyway. It's like putting your hand on a hot stove. And so I got to the point where I was laying back on the tech. And this is about maybe a couple weeks into having nothing more than push-up stretching and a limited amount of tech in the morning. I was starting to already feel better. It was kind of like, I think there's something to this. Let's see if it sticks. And I just stayed with that for a couple weeks. And I think the next thing that I added to it was going outside. For a while, I was standing outside because I was grounding naturally. Now I put a grounding mat under the computer and put my feet on it while I'm working on the computer just to kind of get one thing out of the way without, even thinking about it. But
What is that? What
so
is a
that,
grounding mat?
the frequency that your body's in, a lot of people believe, and there's some science behind it, that you need to put your feet on the earth for a certain amount of time, barefoot, whether it can even be concrete. It doesn't need to be dirt,
Hmm.
grass, earth, wet is better. Sand is fine. Wet sand is great. And to just kind of, for lack of a better term, sync up with the planet. That might sound a little okey doke, but that's just kind of what you're doing is you're getting your body back. We didn't wear shoes. I was at an island one time and the natives didn't wear shoes. You could tell the people who had moved to the island versus the people who were born there because people born there didn't wear shoes. And in the supermarket, in church, anywhere, they never had shoes on. And I was going outdoors to ground for a while and get sun at the same time and just slowly built it up. And my stack is ever changing. It's always evolving. I've just started running again in the last month. So sometimes running and the sunlight exposure get combined. I think it's important to be disciplined, but at the same time, you be sensibly flexible. If you can make this better and work more efficiently, make the changes needed. That doesn't mean get lazy and sit on the couch, watch Netflix, and eat donuts. It's not something that needs to be terribly rigid.
I had one last, I want to go back to the cold plunge thing about you have a dedicated pool, a cold plunge tub or whatever. What are some substitutes if our listeners wanted to get the advantages of a cold plunge? Are there some things they can do without investing in the
Well,
hardware there?
I used cryotherapy for many years before I even got into cold plunge. Affordable than cryo is because I don't have a $100,000 cryo chamber in my house. You can set up your own cold plunge now for under $1,000.
No, you don't.
So it is a more affordable version. I was paying $40 every time I walked in there and getting cryotherapy 3 times a week, and it made me feel good. The initial ones, you didn't even get your head in them because they were all nitrous and you couldn't breathe it. And now, with the latest version, we're using electric chambers, which were a little more systemic. But in my opinion, and I don't have any data to back this up, the cold plunge is a much better therapy than cryo. I feel much better using cold plunge, but there's other things to play. I use the cold plunge every day, and I was doing cryo 3 times a week. So, there's half a dozen ones. I don't know but I can tell you that if you take 10 minutes at 43 degrees every single day up to your chin, you're going to feel amazing. And it only hurts the first couple times. It's amazing. First couple times were very difficult for me. I had one of the people who
Oh,
worked at the
okay.
place where I tried it with me. Like, I
Okay.
was afraid I was going to pass out in the thing or panic or whatever. And my goal was to make it 45 seconds and I made it 30. And after a while, you realize, look, it's the first 45 seconds that you feel anything at all. And when I get in there now, my my heart rate and my breathing are the lowest they are all day long, while my respiratory rate and everything else is the lowest while I'm in that tub. So it's a relaxing, something that I use this as an example for a lot of things, but when there's something that you don't want to do, the hardest part of the cold plunge is getting your first foot in there. And there's so much of life that's like that. Once you're in, it's over.
But isn't that, yeah, that's 95% of the things that we dread going into. And once you get into it, it's like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
I got this. I have a few questions that I save for the end for everybody. We've gone through one of them already, I think, but I'm going to give you a chance to add to this. I refer back to Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. You've listed many things, and we appreciate that, concrete actions that you do that are non-negotiable in your day. Is there anything beyond the ones we've talked to that you'd like to add to that our listeners should consider implementing?
I'm a
Maybe we
huge
covered
Covey
them
fan,
all.
so I could go on for days. Everything from win-win to keeping it out of the urgent quadrant. It's just um, life's an ongoing.
Oh, that's a whole episode in
Yeah,
itself. I
it's
appreciate
just
that.
life is one big lesson, and if you're willing to pay attention and learn along the way, life becomes so much better. I think when I was a young man, I looked to old age. What now where I am is what I thought was old age. To be something to dread and fear. And I'm so much happier today than I ever was in life. And it's because I've learned the way. As you're going through life, you pay attention to what makes you feel good, and what you should do, what you shouldn't do, and then act accordingly. And it's a great lesson. It's something that's just very, very enjoyable.
What if you could list 2 or 3 of the most influential books that you've read? And can you give our listeners a rundown of your top recommended books that are out there, in addition, of course, to Messed Up Like You? What else would you recommend for our listeners to implement
The
into their
three
lives?
that changed my life were Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, 7 Habits by
Absolutely.
Dr. Covey, and Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki.
Great. Yeah, very well known, very popular, and for good reason. Some excellent works there. Do you think Napoleon Hill is still as widely regarded today as he might have been in previous decades? It is dated, but it is invaluable.
I don't know whether younger readers are reading Napoleon Hill or not. I found the stories enchanting. Not only with the lessons in there, but as you're listening to these stories, and he's talking to Edison and Firestone and Ford. I mean, it was just, and the stories about those guys being together, and I think about that time and those people at that moment, and the people today. I don't want to create any controversy in your podcast, but the people today, to me, represent those, we have great things happening now that are going to dwarf that. And that was an incredible time. The stories of Edison and Ford and all of these guys, it was just a magical time and a magical place to be. And to hear Napoleon Hill describe all these things and how he got himself through the door to talk to all these people was just as enchanting as the lessons that he had to give you. And his lessons are so simple that they'll apply forever.
And a last thing, and then we'll use this as a sign off. I tend to think in conversations, our guests have a question, maybe that is a favorite question, one that they look forward to answering, or something they hope to bring up in any podcast that I might not have brought to the fore. Something you want to mention, a plug you want to make, or a final piece of advice that you would leave our listeners with. If you have something in mind there, we'd really appreciate your sharing that with us. And then after that, I think we'll sign off.
The one thing that I'd like to finish with is that wherever you are in life and whatever you've been through, it has nothing to do with where you're going. Past has no bearing on your future, and you're free to change the direction you're headed at any time you want.
Wow. Yeah, simple, but amazingly powerful. That's great. Rick Culleton with us today, author of Messed Up Like You, currently available, and another book in the works entitled The Morning Stack.
We have a website, mymorningstack.com, that's
Website.
free, and
Okay.
we're still working on the title. I think that'll be the last thing, the second to the last thing that happens, right before, because we need that for the cover. But it will be at the end.
Okay. All right. That works. A very YouTube approach, right? Get your content, then make your marketing material, or make what's seen most. Rick, thank you very much. A fascinating conversation. Thank you for your time. Listeners, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again next week.